Tim Nolan, welcome to Over the Bonnet.
Thank you, Mark. Nice to meet you.
Flying has been an integral part of your life. What got you into flying in the first place?
I had no family background. A lot of people do, but I didn't. I was just as an ordinary schoolboy, Manchester, England, and looking out the window, thinking, "Oh, that would be a great job." But it wasn't that easy. I mean, I was at what we call you have grammar schools here, I think. And so I put my hand up when I was 17 to go for selection for the RAF, the Navy, as a pilot, and also to, the civil flying school for British Airways. And I thought, I want to be a pilot. They'll take me. Oh no, it's not that easy. It's the selection was probably 1 in 100 people who apply. They filter it down. So if you get to go for the selection stage, it's probably down to about 1 in 10. But I had nothing to offer them. Nothing. I was looking back now. I'm just appalled at how ill prepared I was. For example, Mark, I can give. I remember this Navy captain asking me, normal question. So why do you want to be a pilot? Oh, I just do. Are you interested? Yeah, I'm very interested. What books have you read? And I thought, I could only think of one that I hadn't read, which was called Enemy Coast Ahead, which is by Guy Gibson, which is the Dambuster raid. So I know that now. So he said, "Oh, you've read Enemy Coast Ahead?" And I went, "Tell me about it." So I was as ill-prepared as that. And I did not deserve to get selected, and I didn't.
Were you good in maths at school?
Maths? Yeah, I was. Maths was one of my subjects, and I got, passed out at 18. We call it A-levels, matriculation, I don't know what. And I got a pass in maths, but not especially good. It was I did maths and physics. There's the two subjects I did up to 18. But again, they're not interested in that when being selected for a pilot. They want to see personality, and then you get tested for leadership. They're very, very interested in that. And you have to kind of stand out from the other 9 potential recruits. So sports, intelligence, all of the parameters, I didn't much. So I didn't get in, okay, to all 3 of my attempts. So I went back to studying for my A-levels, thinking, how can I, get to be... Anyway, I got 2 very poor passes at 18. My mother had just died, so the headmaster could see a bit of an excuse there. It wasn't really the reason I got poor results. And he got me into a university studying engineering on some kind of back channel after the places had been given out. So I showed up at Loughborough University to study engineering. I was completely overwhelmed by maths and physics. I didn't understand it. But fortunately, this university on you would call it Freshers' Week, I guess, various pastimes or hobby clubs or interests. And one was called the University Air Squadron, which is the Royal Air Force they ran probably about 12 of these around the country. And they offered to dress you in a semi-RAF uniform and teach you to fly. Well, how good would that be?
Wow.
So I said, yes, please, and they took me on. And I don't know why, but they did.
You were saying about what makes a good pilot, that they were looking to find out what your aptitudes were. What does make a good pilot?
That's a good question. It's not maths or physics. It's not necessarily leadership, which they were looking for, because you were recruited as an officer. So that was a kind of a different side to it. What makes a good pilot is somebody who can think on his feet, or sitting on his backside, as in this case. And you might be setting out on a mission is too strong a word, on a training exercise. There will be some curved ball come at you, and whilst dealing with the mechanics of flying and the small brain power involved in that, you would have to deal with one or more extraneous tasks that came in, and not give up on those and hunt down the objective to the best of your ability. That could be one way of looking at what makes a good pilot. In civil airlines, which I flew for probably longer than I was in the RAF, what makes a good pilot are a different set of parameters. Sticking rigidly to the operating procedures laid down and not deviating unless you had to. Now that's what made a good airline pilot, in my view. Somebody who knew you had to know the operating procedures so that we might show up to fly together. We're talking about airlines now. And we'd both straight away be on the same page. We're flicking switches, making radio calls as though we had flown together 100 times. Okay, that's what we call standard operating procedures. But a good airline pilot, again, something, a bit of a curveball that is not covered by the standard operating procedures. You would be able to fly or operate this large aeroplane and get it home.
What's the biggest curveball you've got, do you recall, in your career that's you've just gone, oh my goodness, I've got to focus here, I've got to compose, this is not good?
You would think I'd come up with a military answer to that, and I might be able to whilst I'm answering this one. But in airline flying, it's all about following the procedures, flicking the switches in the correct order, and getting the job done as safely and as routinely as is possible. That's the job. We don't, we're caring for passengers. The only time that I found I was challenged would be flying into the back end or the front end of a typhoon, cyclone, we call it in Australia, where the wind speeds are outrageous. Now, you'd think, well, why would you be flying in that? Well, you only stop flying in that when the outrageous wind is blowing across the runway and is definitely outside the limits of the airplane. But because I flew in Asia quite a lot as an airline pilot, and these conditions pertain, during the typhoon season, the beginning all the way through. So you would quite often be going into an airport where you were thinking, I don't fancy this, but I'm definitely going to have a go because it's within limits. But it's only just within limits. And when the wind blows very strongly, it's not a constant wind. It's in and it's out of limits, in and out. So we're going back to when I felt challenged as an airline pilot. It might be going to typically was going into Tokyo Narita, which suffers from these these conditions quite often. So we're going into land. The airspeed is pitching up and down horribly because of the wind gusts. The nose of the airplane is pitching up and down to cater for the varying speeds, and the crosswind angle. I'm looking, not facing the runway. Out my front window is the airport terminal buildings as we crab in and I'm thinking, well, press on, wait till we get to the runway, take it out of autopilot quite late, and then it's down to instinctive flying techniques to straighten it up, land it, and stop it. And I don't know if I explain that clearly just use the word at layman, but that was the most challenging thing I had to do, because the other option is go around, which somebody else might have done just 2 minutes before you, but he had had a slightly different set of circumstances. That's it. And if you're probably talking about, you were probably expecting an answer on in-flight emergencies, but certainly in airline flying, that's very rare.
What about in the military?
In the military, you were always, and if you're flying a fighter type airplane, you're usually flying right on the ragged edge of the airplane's performance, as in turning hard, buffeting airplane on the edge of the stall, very low level, whilst being simulated attack by other airplanes, and you're looking back over your shoulder and you are working at 100% red line stuff. And it was it was stressful, but that was the job.
Was it what you expected when you wanted to become a pilot, when you finally...
No, because as I said to you, Mark, I didn't know absolutely anything at all, really, you're talking about when I was 18. But you gradually learn what is expected of you. And certainly to get into the fast jet world in Australia now, that would be the F-18, I guess. It's not easy, even when you're accepted as a pilot. It's a very competitive process to get to that seat. And the washout rate along the way is high. So the question was, you were always operating at 100% on most flights in the fighter world. And it was physically demanding as well as kind of mentally demanding as well.
Talk about the training when you actually got into the RAV, when you finally got into the controls. How did you feel?
I felt very lucky, because I'd come from nowhere to go to university, get into this university air squadron, simultaneously getting kicked out of the university because I was not good enough to do engineering. Mentally, I just couldn't cope with the physics and water, hydraulics and the rest of it. But by that stage, I'd done 9 months in this university air squadron, and somehow, when I reapplied to the Air Force with not much more than I'd had a year and a half earlier, this university, I'd shown enough on this little RAF unit that it must have got me through. So your question was, how did it feel? I felt bloody lucky to be in that position. It was, we felt too cool for school. We felt an elite. We weren't actually an elite because we were operating in a complete bubble, because people outside of the military don't pay any attention to it at all. They don't think, oh, he's a cool bloke, he's in the Air Force. Not at all. But we felt part of an elite, and that's probably the right attitude.
When you see a movie like Top Gun, what does that make you feel?
Well, disappointingly, it's not realistic at all, and it can't be because of the necessity to film it. For example, an easy example would be Tom Cruise and Goose in the back there with their masks hanging off, and they're just talking to it. It doesn't happen. Your mask is on. Now that wouldn't work in a movie, would it? You want to see Tom Cruise, so he has his mask off, and when he's doing those manoeuvres to shoot down the MiGs, which weren't MiGs, they were American planes. But this is all this is the boring stuff that we know that the general public don't. All those manoeuvres were entirely unrealistic. So overall, loved the movie, but it's, if a doctor sees a hospital movie, he'll be picking holes in it. If a policeman watches the crime, he's going to be picking holes in it. So it's just the same for us.
When you started to go to actually flying, the first plane that you started working in, when you're actually on the job, what happened then?
Well, the training was the the initial training was done on something called a jet provost, which was it's a jet aeroplane, which, that's cool. Just basically come out of school, and here I am flying a jet. It made a jet-type noise, but it didn't really go very fast, but that doesn't matter. Now, so this was called a jet provost, as I've just said. Not many years after that, I was an instructor on the same jet provost, and I hated the bloody thing. It seemed such a Mickey Mouse aeroplane that didn't go fast and was, had a lot of handling characteristics that, to me, by then weren't up to scratch. So when you view it as a student, it is a rocket ship. When you view it a few years later, when you're stuck there for a couple of years on the damn thing, I hated it. So your question was, how did I feel at the time? I felt great. I loved it, and I was top of the world.
Well, quite literally. So whereabouts did you go once you started actually getting operational? Where were you based, and where were you sort of...
Actually, my first, once I finished with the training, got out of the training system, I was posted to the Vulcan bomber, if you can, any idea, which the Vulcan was one of the V-bombers which carried nuclear weapons in the Cold War. And this was a particularly beautiful one. It was a big triangular or delta shape, very charismatic. Again, though, Mark, on the inside, it was very, very cramped with two pilots up the front, and there's something very uncomfortable. Nevertheless, it was a great aeroplane, and even better, I was posted overseas to Cyprus, which was just beautiful. So, I'd been brought up obviously in England, Manchester, rain, grey skies, my whole life pretty much, and then suddenly I'm out there in the Mediterranean flying a Vulcan bomber, and again it was just a great few years.
Can you talk about some of the sorties that you went on and what sort of experiences you had in the Vulcan?
Nothing dramatic, Mark, I'm sorry to, it's going to disappoint you. We pretty much had in Cyprus we had Turkey to the north, which wasn't particularly friendly. We had Syria and Israel to the east, which again not, and we had Egypt to the south. So we were penned in where we could actually fly on a daily, weekly basis. So that meant we had to fly west. It was the only direction we could go. So we went out over the sea for an hour and came back for another hour whilst the navigators did their magic stuff. Then we dropped down to low level, fly around Cyprus, because again we had nowhere else to go. Then we'd get on the bombing range, drop a few practice bombs, and then do a few practice circuits, a few practice landings. About a 5-hour flight. Not terribly exciting, I have to say, but overall it was part of a great life at that time.
Because it wasn't that long after the war, the 7-Day War.
Yeah, that was 1967, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And now we're talking 1971, so it's 3 or 4 years later.
Was there still the tension around?
It was no tension applying to ourselves, because we weren't part of that 7-Day War or in fact any of the tensions in the Middle East. And as I said, we weren't invited to fly over those places, so we didn't feel it. No, our role was nothing to do with Israel, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, whatever. It was purely against the communist threat, which it was. It was still the Cold War as we knew it. So our wartime targets would be up northeast into Russia.
What were your thoughts if you actually had to go into battle? Were you prepared for that sort of thing? Was that sort of a constant thing on the back of your mind, that the fact that you may have to?
Good question. It never felt very close, as a war with Russia, certainly. It was, however, our job, and however, there were so many other pleasant distractions that we did not focus on that. But had the need arose, we would have done it. absolutely. But a nuclear bomb flown over to our target.
So were you carrying them at all, or was it just practice bombs that you were doing and just doing simulations?
You'll be pleased to know, Mark, we did not carry nuclear bombs around because stuff happens. And as with the Americans who did fly fully armed up in the Arctic Circle on there, they were doing this, the same job to a much larger extent, being Americans. They had bombers up in the Arctic Circle in a holding pattern for 12 hours, 15 hours at a time, and they were fully armed because they were programmed to go should anything happen. And so I think your question is about carrying nuclear bombs. They did have a few mishaps. They inadvertently dropped one just off southern Spain.
What happened then, do you know?
They denied it. And for a long time there was, I'm trying to think, I think it was just off the coast. They looked for it and couldn't find it. So they effectively blocked off the area for a long time, monitoring for any sign of nuclear disruption, which didn't occur. They also lost one in the Arctic Circle, because that's where they were circling around. Again, when somebody suspected it happened, of course, deny, but it was there, and but again, it got covered by ice over a few years, and I guess now that it's going to, in the next few years with the global warming, it might that bomb might surface again, but they'll deal with it.
So was there never a worry that it was going to bomb that one that was dropped off the coast, that it would actually detonate?
No, because you arm these bombs. They're not. You don't just pull a pin and they drop off and
it's not
and
like your traditional.
No, there's a. They are. The final part of the arming process is done from within the airplane. So unless they mean to drop it and they mean it to go boom, that final arming wouldn't have occurred. So they're just sitting there inert, not. I mean, it's full of fissile material, so.
So still there, both of them?
Well, I can't. It's a long time ago. We're talking in the 60s. So that's, how many years is that? 60 years ago. I can't say, they haven't told me.
So you talk about the cramped conditions in these aircraft.
Yeah.
These guys that were flying, and even when you were doing operations, how did you cope with that, with the cramped conditions?
Yeah, you just coped with it. You were sitting on a hard seat, and you do that for 5, 6, 7 hours, and that was your job. You just, I'm sorry, Mark, to give you a boring answer, but you just did cope with it. You didn't. We were sitting on an ejection seat, for example, in our case. And,
what about claustrophobia? Was there any of that?
No. If you were claustrophobic, you wouldn't have got anywhere near that part of the flying chain.
What was the sort of thing, though, that did rule people out when you were going through the selection process to be, say, a bomber pilot or fighter pilot? What were the things that really ruled people out?
We're now going back to the horrible jet provost that I mentioned earlier, the training plane. Some people right off the bat would be airsick.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, because military flying is not, okay, we're going to take off now and we're going to fly for an hour in this direction, then we'll turn around and come back. Pretty much as soon as you get airborne, you're putting on a lot of bank and pulling G, which, if you're familiar, when a military airplane turns from north onto west, he might well be pulling, I'm sorry, not just turns, but when he's doing combat manoeuvres, and you were training for that. Well, nowadays they pull 9G.
Really?
Oh yeah, in the F-18s that fly around here. So if you're sitting there strapped in, and you've got a helmet on, which might weigh, I don't know, 3 kilos, something like that. That helmet suddenly weighs 3 times 9, 27 kilos. And at the same time, you're moving your neck and looking at there, which is pulling your head in all kinds of directions. That's just one effect of radial G when when you're turning a fighter plane. It's uncomfortable. The other effect is that all your blood starts to pool away from your head, and the heart can't pump it back up to your head. So you start to grey out, and if you keep pulling it beyond whatever your limit is, you'll black out. You will black out.
How close did you get?
I've certainly blacked out a few times, because if you're not ready for it, if you suddenly you tense up your muscles to cramp your stomach to keep all the blood from pooling down to your lower limbs to keep it up.
And the G-suit would obviously help with that.
A G-suit cramps on your legs. Very good question. It cramps on you, but it doesn't do much else. It might reduce the effective G by 1 or 2. You've still got a lot of work to do. So you're grunting, and yeah, it's hard work. We're talking now about a fighter jet. We've moved on from training. But we did, your question was weeding out people from training. Well, we did those maneuvers in a 4G, 5G in the training plane. And so some people would be sick straight away. There was a procedure to try and recover them, but it often didn't work. And as I alluded to earlier on, many people couldn't cope with flying the airplane, pulling that G, and thinking about whatever task had to be done.
How much further forward from when you're working at that speed, you've got to think ahead. How much further ahead is it a practiced art that you need to do, or is it just happening?
No, we were not clever people, but the best could keep their brain function going while there was a lot of other stuff going on. For example, if I may, if the RAF flew low level, that was their modus operandi to avoid radar. Okay, the Americans had a different idea, which is not the subject. So you could be flying at 500 miles an hour at a couple of hundred feet above the ground. So, and then in those days you had a map. You'd nothing else, a map and a stopwatch. You're going along looking for a tower that's on your track, and it's a little bit left, so you start to correct for that. And then in comes another fighter to simulating an enemy fighter to attack you. So you now have to maneuver against him, and the others in your formation carry out the same maneuvers, whatever, to defeat this attack. So you have a bit of a furball, and eventually you get spat out, and now you have to find, well, where are we? Because we're off track, and we still want to progress at 500. Now we have to up our speed because we're a bit late. How much speed? When are we going to get there? This sort of thing. So yeah, that sums up a fighter pilot task.
When you're flying at that sort of speed and at that sort of level at a few hundred feet, are you having to combat drift and things like that? Is wind a factor, or is it just you're going too fast?
Wind was not a factor, and it was the faster you go, the less effect wind has. It does have an effect, but you could drift off track for several reasons: wind, or most likely you're not flying an accurate course because somebody's trying to chase you from behind. Sorry, what was your question? Wind?
Yeah, as I say, well,
no, wind is not. But what is an even more surprising situation in which wind does apply? So moving on before I transitioned to the Phantom fighter jet, I had to go through a weapons training school. Okay, flying at an old fighter plane called the Hunter, beautiful airplane. And sorry, the most part of the course was firing various weapons at the ground ranges. And the first one we did was firing the cannon, okay, at a target on the range, which was made up of Hessian flags, sort of thing, stretched out between two poles. So you'd fly around the pattern, maybe 1,000 feet. You'd watch the target go under the nose. You'd roll over, pull down, get it fixed in your gun sight, the target. So now you're rushing down a slope towards this target until various events happen to prompt you into firing the gun. You're at a certain range, which was about 600 meters, something like that. So 600 meters away from this Hessian flag, and you're hurtling at it, and it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger in your windscreen all the time. You would a gunfire of only that length. Now these are cannon shells, maybe 6 inches long, and they come hurtling out of the gun. Okay, you're already going at 600 and plus miles an hour.
Was it exhilarating when you...
Oh, absolutely, yeah. But the point I'm getting at, Mark, is that this projectile, which comes out at the speed of heat towards that target, is affected by the wind. What? How can that be? And so you had to be... So if it was a strong wind from, say, the left or the right, you had to lay off your gun sight into the wind by a guesstimated amount, a judged amount, such that when the cannon shell got drifted by the wind, it would drift onto the target. Now, I've never figured that out. How can, or a rocket, how can that be affected by wind in a flight time of 1.5 seconds? But it is.
That's amazing.
And now, please don't press me on the physics of that. It does happen.
But all this must happen in seconds.
Seconds, yeah. I remember going through that particular school, and I was doing fine until we came up to the first weapon event, which, as I've described, was firing the cannon, which is actually the easiest of the weapons events. No score, no score. And this went on and on and on for 3 or 4 flights until the event would be filmed through the gun sight, and you'd get a debrief by one of the weapons experts, and he'd go, yeah, that looks good, the Piepers on the target, where was the wind? Yeah, you've laid off the right amount and you've fired, yeah, you're in range, so you probably got a reasonable score. How many did you get? None. 0. What? Oh, okay, well, tough luck, better luck next time. Because it wasn't it was difficult to assess exactly what's going on. It's all very well for him to say, tough luck, you should have done it, you deserved a better score. But after 3 or 4 of these now, I was up to be terminated from the course if I didn't get, on my next flight, if I didn't get a score.
That's pressure.
Yeah, so I remember going out to the airplane thinking, oh, well, I've had a good time, which actually is not the right attitude. It should be, I'm going to nail this, I am going to do this. But I remember going, yeah, I've enjoyed it, given it my best shot. This is the wrong attitude. But anyway, I remember going down the dive on possibly my last flight, and it was, then you pull off, and 12, wow, I'd actually hit it. And my euphoria was such that as you pull out of the dive with 6G, as I explained what 6G is like, I didn't stop it, the subsequent climb, and I went vertically up into cloud. I was so happy with myself, which was actually damn difficult to get back down out of the cloud in the right place. So wind, it affects bullets. Well, we know that from snipers, right? And it's not an exact science because I'd got the gun sight in the right place, but it just wasn't hitting. I was under a lot of pressure, and I remember the reading my post-course report where it said, talking about this at Guns event, oh yeah, Nolan pulled himself up by his bootstraps to meet the standard. And that's the first time I really understood that that phrase, to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, because it's actually impossible, but you can imagine the effort required to do that.
There must have been a part of you, though, that really was going, I'm not going to be defeated by this.
Well, I guess so, because that's happened to me a few times. I'm not by any means had a smooth upward trajectory in my flying life. There's been lots of rocks and pitfalls and snakes and ladders along the way.
And is that typical for a pilot?
No, the best ones have a smooth upward trajectory that goes onwards and upwards up to the top. And the up and down bit that I had is typical of mid-level competency.
What were the egos like?
Huge, no doubt about it. It was a cruel, cruel world there, certainly in the fighter world. The banter, as it's called nowadays, was you'd like to say cruel but fair. It was cruel and unfair, and would pick on any weaknesses in somebody in a joking way, but in a hurtful way, in the crew room chat.
Good old sledging.
Sledging. That's what it is, yeah.
What did you learn about yourself through all of that?
I learned that you never give up, because on a subsequent course I did get scratched, and that's when I ended up instructing back on the damn jet provost for a couple of years. But then I got back into it through never giving up. I felt I could do this. I can do this, and I did. Then
you moved on. The sort of the flagship of what you flew, the Phantom.
Yeah, as I say, after a snakes and ladders dive down the snake, I got up the ladder by believing in myself and overcoming obstacles. And I got onto the Phantom, which was a beast of an aeroplane. Absolute. You had it here in Australia before you got the F-111s, but only for a short period, so not many people remember it. But the Phantom, an American aeroplane, was ugly in a purposeful way. It dripped fuel, it dripped hydraulics. It was unserviceable a lot of the time. It had two big jet exhausts right at the back that, when you wanted to, you would put it into afterburner, and those jet exhausts would open up, like in Top Gun. You've seen the back end of those F-14s. The nozzles would open at the back, and then boom, light the afterburner, and you could see pink, purple, red, orange colours coming out the back to 20 feet flames out of the end, and that would kick you forward at an astonishing rate.
What was that sort of acceleration? What did that feel like?
Phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal, but it felt smooth from inside the cockpit. Even there was violence going on at the back end of the aeroplane. Really, there was, and it's the same in current fighters. Actually, Mark, current fighters, they're not quite as manly as they used to be. I say that with a big smile on my face because if you go to this, my sons, I flew those Phantoms mainly at a place called RAF Coningsby in Lincolnshire. My sons went back to visit because they were kids around that base. They went back to visit a couple of years ago, and the current aeroplane that's flying there is the Typhoon, which is a super capable, much more capable, much faster than the Phantom, everything else. But the engines aren't as noisy. And they said, Dad, they are just not as noisy as they used to be. So when I was joking when I said they're not as manly, because they definitely are. But if you could, we lived in a private house 3 or 4 miles from the base, and our exit route from the base, we went, for some reason I can't remember, but we went at about 600 feet, and we actually flew over my house and then turned right, hard right, to go out over the North Sea. And so we love this sound of freedom over our house. It would be outrageous if it happened now. I would be complaining to everybody about the outrageous noise these damn things made, but we loved it, and my kids loved it.
It's something that you grow up with. I know that living on an Air Force base myself, back in the day, because we'd wander down, well, I'd often wander down and watch the Mirages and
exactly
F-111s, watching them take off. And it was just the feeling.
It would reverberate your chest if you were close enough.
Yeah, it did. Yeah. It did, and it was an amazing feeling. So let's look at what happened on the inside then. What was the experience on your body when that sort of thrust?
Oh, well, because it's a good question, but it's not like the effect of pulling G around a corner, around a turn. It's not like that at all. It's, as I mentioned a couple of minutes back, it's actually a very smooth acceleration, and because it's longitudinal, straight fore and aft pushing, it's not physiologically affecting you. It gives you a slight lift out of your seat, but it's a smooth and pleasant feeling.
When you are dealing at that sort of speed and that sort of height, were there any situations where you've thought, "Oh crap, I've overstepped my ability here"?
In my case, surprisingly, I didn't overstep my ability, which I have many tales of where I have stuffed up, but not to the extent that I'd lost control of the airplane, which is probably what you're alluding to.
Yeah, okay, well, let's talk about where you have stuffed up, where you would...
Oh, now we're moving into my area of expertise. What a great question mark. All right, here's an anecdote from flying the Phantom. So the Falklands War broke out in April 1982, and I had just moved onto this particular squadron called 29 Squadron. And it was mainly a naval battle from the get-go. It was always going to be. But the Air Force were desperate to get in on the act, absolutely desperate. So they nominated one squadron of Phantoms to go to the Falklands and defend the ships. But the trouble was there was nowhere to land on the Falklands. It was, there just wasn't. The one and only airport was not in a state to accept Phantoms. However, that was not a problem. We'll get it ready and we'll get them. So 29 Squadron, my outfit, was nominated as the squadron that was going to save the world down in the Falklands. So that was a pretty strange feeling, because Argentines, they fly Mirage, which, they're a capable aeroplane, and we knew that the Argentine Air Force was very capable. We knew that their pilots were very brave, capable pilots. It turned out that the equipment and the training perhaps didn't live up to that level for the pilots. However, a different story. Back to my story. So there were, I think, 8 crews, pilot navigator crew, nominated to go and save the world down in the Falklands. And I was number 8, just having joined. And I thought, okay, get down. We did lots of exciting stuff, training for it over a couple of weeks. And then the requirement was knocked down to, I think, 6 crews. So I pretended to be disappointed that I was not going, but secretly not too unhappy that I could continue normal life at Coningsby. So this the 6 went to Ascension Island, which is halfway to the Falklands. I continued whatever I was doing. And then about a week later, I think I was playing cricket, and somebody came out and said, "Sir, the squadron commander wants to see you." So, what? Okay, I'll go in. He said, "Oh, Tim," he said, "you're going down to Ascension Island tomorrow. You're leading another 2 Phantoms, and you'll be leaving at early. It's something like 4 a.m. in the dark." Oh, shoot, I thought. So I went, you go home, get your kit, and, be here at 3 o'clock, whatever. So I went home, and at the start of all this, we had been issued with a war kit. Now, that was a canvas tube about 5 feet long, stuffed with tin hat, as in, World War One infantry helmet, knife, fork, spoon in a tin that was your mess tin. It was basic war kit that definitely World War II vintage, if not before, including very long pairs of underpants that didn't fit. But the whole thing was there was not one useful thing in there really. So I went to get I saw my wife. "I love you. I'm not going to like this, but I'm going away for a bit." "No, where's that big duffel bag I brought home a month ago?" She said, "Oh, it's out in the garage, I think." Went out. It was only half. The kids had been at it, and it was half empty. So I found about a half of what was missing. That was the start of it. I reported in for work at, let's say, 4 a.m. the next morning. It was pelting down, absolute stair rods of rain, and with thunderstorms around. And so I was the leader of these 3 Phantoms that was going to get about an 8-hour flight with refueling. And now I can admit this, 30, 40, whatever it is, years on, when we'd had the briefing about all the procedures to get to the Ascension, I was at the back not listening. So there was a lot of people scurrying back and forth to get the airplanes ready, and I asked the chief navigator, I said, "Tell me, how is it we're getting there again?" He said, "Well, it was in the brief." I said, "Oh yeah, okay." And you never want to lose face, even to a ridiculous extent. So I was going to lead this, but I didn't know how we were going to get there. He said, "It's all in the brief, and it's in this packet of documents, which too late to read now because we were going in for our pre-flight brief." So, okay, pretending to know what I was doing, we set off. We had to go south and then meet some tankers, some Victor air refueling tankers in a thunderstorm. So we set off, and it was quite difficult to find them on our radar, but we did find them, and then we turned in behind them, and it was very difficult to get the refueling probe into the basket. It was all up and down in the turbulence, but it got done, and I thought, oh, we did well to find our tanker. 20 minutes later, we burst out of the thunderstorm into beautiful clear skies over southwest England, and we'd actually not blundered, that's the wrong word, but we had just swarmed into this. We had just got into this swarm of tankers. It wasn't 3 that I imagined, 1 each. It was about 12 or 14 all bunched together, and we just, by not reading the brief, I'd barreled into this. I'd found my right one, my correct tanker, but there was no room on either left or right. Oh, that was lucky that we didn't bump into any of those other tankers. So we set forth then, and each tanker, we'd take on fuel at every 45 minutes or something like that. And then the one tanker would give fuel to another tanker until it was empty or time to turn back. And so gradually this swarm of 12 big aeroplane tankers reduced down to 1 tanker and 3 Phantoms. By this time we'd undone our straps a little bit, so we'd give it a wriggle room, and we'd drift away from it by a mile, so we didn't have the close full mate. And all of a sudden, after maybe 6-7 hours, he said, "Triple X flight, that's us. Your position is north 0000.0, because we're on the equator just about. East, whatever it was, some Latin long that was full of zeros, and have a good day." Huh? What? I snapped my mask on, just like Tom Cruise in Top Gun. I said, "Are you leaving us now?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "Don't you know the brief?" And I went, "Oh yeah, okay." I said, I know the brief, but how are we getting to Ascension again? We don't have enough fuel." He said, "Oh, there's a tank, like, dummy, if you'd read the brief, there is another tanker coming out of Ascension Island to meet you, and you'll meet him in about an hour." And we went, "Ooh." And the other two who had swept up and jumped on my wing very close, and we that was quite a moment, because I hadn't expected to be left on our own, literally in the middle of the Atlantic, literally. And just point that way for an hour, and hopefully we'll find another airplane and take fuel from it and continue on. So that's a typical stuff-up mark on my part. I hadn't listened to the briefing, and I was shocked and surprised and horrified by what happened.
Were there many of those? Because it must have been just a fun time in your life.
It was fun, and we always got away with it, and we bragged about stuff like that. Stuff-ups on... some of them are kind of difficult to explain in this context, but I've done beat-ups of places that would have been wise not to have done, because you asked about egos. They were huge. Mine was huge. And I remember we were asked to do a flyby at a graduation parade at a training school once, and okay, they want to beat up. You got the right boy here, were my thoughts as I found the airfield, and it was cloudy. And
for someone that doesn't know, what's a beat up?
A beat up is if I just go roaring.
Buzz the tower, as in
Top Gun. Exactly. I keep referring to Top Gun, that I said wasn't realistic, but there is a lot in there. So this case, there were all the students graduating from their jet provost course. Their mums and dads were standing outside the hangar, expecting, and I was going to show them what the real Air Force was about. And so I plugged in those afterburners, felt that lift out of the seat as the acceleration. But it was very difficult to see them because it was cloudy, the visibility was poor. The beat-up should have been called off. But no, I can do this. Carried on until out of the murk, I picked, I was fairly familiar with this airfield. I saw the hangars, I saw the people, and it was gone, because that's the speed I was going at. And just out of the corner of my eye, as I passed the people down on my left side, I was very low, making lots of noise, which is what I wanted. I saw these big lighting towers go by my right wing, which I didn't know were there. So, lots of things like that. Perhaps even better when are we still on stuff-ups?
Absolutely.
Okay. A year or so later, I was flying the Spitfire, doing demonstrations. Have you heard of the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight?
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, Spitfire, Hurricane, and Lancaster. So I was flying the Spitfire and the Hurricane. My ego was now much bigger than before. And so one pleasant evening in September, it was probably right on this date now, is September the 25th, Battle of Britain Day. This is celebrated every year. I had to fly from my base in the middle of England down to the south in a Spitfire. Just dead easy. Fly down there, south of London, find the Royal Air Force Staff College full of bigwigs having their Battle of Britain cocktail party. Fly over, not too much of a beat up because you'd be in trouble. Okay. Just a nice flyby and come home. What a lovely job. The beautiful weather. I'm flying down there in my black flying suit, red sunglasses. I was way too cool to live with anybody. I'm slightly exaggerating, but not much. I love myself, sick as Australians say. So, going about a 45-minute transit, which was lovely in a Spitfire, because every minute you flew it was preciously guarded. They didn't want the aeroplanes flying too much. And the target, if you like, it wasn't really a target, was called Bracknell, which is in a beautiful part of England. It's to the south and the west of London Heathrow Airport. So I called up, and I didn't really have to call them, but I thought I'd do them a favour and let them know I was in the area. I was out of their airspace, but so our call sign was Spitfire. That's cool. Heathrow VFR controller. It wasn't the ones that were controlling the airplanes. It was just a little corner of the airspace. This is Spitfire. Oh, hello. Yeah, I'm going to be flying past Bracknell at time 1835, whatever it was, and I'll be flying west to east. He said, "Oh, okay, fine." He said, and he came back on a couple of minutes later. Spitfire, would you like to do a flyby at Heathrow? Now that's a biggie, right? I'd never been to Heathrow, never seen it. Big airport, Friday evening, busy as, with airliners going about their business. But now we were not supposed to accept these kind of invitations, but of course we did. The ego had to be satisfied. So if you just imagine in your mind a map of southern England, I'm flying from the west to the east, exactly on a heading of 090, and I find the Bracknell, and I over that, not too much of a beat up because you'd be in trouble. Pulled up, and I called Heathrow again. Heathrow, I'm at 1,000 feet, flying 090. Oh, Roger, I'll have you on radar. Keep that heading. So I'm now tracking along the bottom of Heathrow's airspace. And he said, in about 2 minutes, I'm going to turn you left onto north. Can you see the airport? Oh, wow, that's huge. Wow, my God. Look, I'm trying to pick out the control tower, but it's too far away. So I think, oh, well, I can probably do a job on that. And he said, in 2 minutes, I'm going to turn you left onto north, and then I'll be turning you in a gap in the approaching traffic. So I looked out to my right, out to the east, and there was a stack of airliners coming down the approach with their lights twinkling, and it was not dusk, but it was getting that way, and you could see the lights. I thought, wow, look at all those airliners. Wow, my God. So he said, okay, Spitfire, turn left onto north. And so I started the turn, and now on the Spitfire, the control stick ends, it's called a spade grip. It was popular in World War II times. So the stick comes out of the floor, and there's a circular top to it, like a ring. And on that ring was the gun firing button, which had been changed into a radio transmit button, all made out of World War II engineering brass. So, turn Spitfire, turn left, 360. And I don't know why, I looked down at my thumb when I said Roger or something like that, well, turning left onto north. And we used to wear white chamois leather gloves, which very soon on the palm side of your hand became black, because you were always patting aeroplanes full of oil as you did your inspections or whatever. And there were sticky black, horrible things on the palm. I looked down at my Roger Spitfire, I said, or something like that. And as my thumb came off the brass button was stuck to my thumb. And I looked nonplussed at this thing, going, what? But that was only for a second, because then the brass button dropped from my thumb and clunked onto the floor and rolled down the back of the Spitfire. So now I had no radio, because that blacks out the radio completely. It's interrupted. I can neither hear them nor speak to them. So I'm now about 3 miles from Heathrow Airport with all these airliners stacked up on my right. Now, there's only one thing to do. That's continue on your last heading and disappear and bugger off back to base and not bother them. Oh, no. I've been invited to beat up Heathrow. I'm going to do it. What was I thinking? I can't tell you what I was thinking. I tipped left, got down as low as I could, and I'm now going to beat up London Heathrow Airport with no radio on a busy Friday evening. Can you explain that to me, Mark? I mean, it's just nonsense. Anyway, I did it, but I didn't do a very good beat up because jumbo jets, as we used to call them then, were a lot bigger than I had imagined. Being in amongst them, there were lighting towers, there were many buildings in the middle of the airport. So I picked up what I thought was the control tower, but I was already feeling I am in the shit here. And my heart had gone out of it. But I was right in the middle of it. I was literally in the middle of Heathrow, right? So I go, oh, Christ, what am I doing? I'm already thinking this before I'm at the control tower. I fly past what I think is the control tower. And then there's another runway in front of me. I didn't know there were two. Of course, there were two runways, but I didn't know. And there was an airplane landing. Fortunately, landing, not taking off. I dodged over him. And then, when you want to disappear, which I did, at that point, I just wanted to shrink into a cloaking device would have been excellent. So I'm now going at whatever speed a Spitfire goes. And I go lower and lower and lower just to disappear so nobody can see me. Well, that doesn't make things better. It makes things worse. So I've now turned from the steely-eyed, egotistical, brave, I can do anything, into a complete jelly-limbed thing that wants to disappear. So past the hotels, past the A4 road, more hotels, disappear, please let me disappear. Until I'm out of there. And then I had the most unpleasant 45-minute transit back to my base, thinking, oh no, how am I going to get out of this? I am really, really in the shoot now. So, as I say, the brave man has changed totally. Landed back at base. I normally have pleasant chat with the ground crew, but now I had no time for that. The propeller was still as I jumped out and hobbled to the squadron buildings. I was hobbling because I was pulling out of my thigh pocket a book that contained information on all airports, including Heathrow. And I was wanting the telephone number of the person that I'd spoken to. Okay, the air traffic controller. An old-fashioned telephone, 1980 something. Burp, burp. Heathrow Visual Control. Hello, it's in a very wimpy voice. It's Spitfire pilot here. I was going to beg forgiveness and please don't, if you can possibly don't tell anybody. Hello, Spitfire pilot. He said, "Oh, thank Christ you've rang. Look, if anybody asks you, did you, don't tell anybody that we invited you, please, please, please." And I said, so he was. I said, "Yeah, okay, man." I having now all the bravery surged through my, and I said, "Okay, then I can do sort of Tom Cruise style, put the phone down." I got away with it because they were in trouble as well.
Oh, that is amazing. Now you've flown some of the premier aircraft that the British Air Force had at that time, but it must have been a real honour to pilot the Hurricanes and the Spitfires.
Yes, it was. It definitely was. You had to be, I'm not at all saying you're the best of the best to get that job. It was part-time, allied to my main job of instructing on the Phantom. But you had to be on the Phantom school, if you like. You had to be a flying instructor on that because we didn't go away on deployments like the operational squadrons did. So you had to be on that squadron, and you had to be recommended by somebody. And I had got a recommend by this bigwig on the base, whom I had impressed somehow, and I don't really know how. So I parachuted into this job, and it was a great honour, and it's stirred up a huge amount of envy amongst one's fellows, which of course was great. But at the same time, you had to be very, very careful with the airplanes. And there were, I don't know why, but after the jet age pilots, if you like, have always not whinged about flying the Spitfire particularly, but pointed out the difficulties of flying it. Whereas,
really,
oh yeah, it had a very narrow track undercarriage. You couldn't see out of it when it was on the ground. It had a huge engine sticking up straight ahead. You couldn't see straight ahead. You could only see a little bit down between the wing and the engine nacelle. And it was very, very skittery in a crosswind. Now, I've just reading only yesterday about the air transport auxiliary that used to ferry pilots, that used to ferry aircraft around in England. And the big story there is that women pilots, in those that were big for those days, were allowed to do this. And they flew Spitfires around in atrocious weather. And I remember yesterday reading that she said jet age pilots have always, not complaining is not the right word, but pointing out how difficult it is to fly the Spitfire with crosswinds and visibility out the front and this and that, and yet 18, 19-year-old kids do it, and women did it. Huh? So there's a discontinuity there, but we did find it quite tricky to fly because of in a crosswind particularly.
Did you get a real feel for the nostalgia of actually what
Yes.
these guys went through?
Well, the performance in terms of speed, and we didn't thrash them by any means, so we looked after them extremely well. So we didn't enjoy their full performance, shall we say. But even so, it would have been not much compared to what our day job in the Phantom. So we didn't get a feel for how superior they were in the day. But you were flying a piece of history, and that infused you definitely with I've got to take care of this baby, and a certain sense of pride as well.
When you were actually flying these things, though, did you get that historic awareness of days gone by?
On the way down to Heathrow, I did. I described my feeling of well-being as I flew south on that particular day, because you look out at the elliptical wings on the Spitfire, particularly, beautiful and only applicable to the Spitfire. So you knew you were in a Spitfire, which is a piece of British history and heritage. So you were infused with that historical heritage, blah, blah, blah. And I got to take, but overriding was I got to take care of this baby. And if you knew there was a crosswind landing coming on the other end, you started to get pay more and more attention as you got down towards your landing area.
Are there many of them flying these days?
There's more and more, which is strange. In 1982, there weren't many in England, 2 or 3 or 4, other than the historic flight. But Spitfires get rebuilt from impossible-looking wrecks that are found around the place and lovingly and expertly restored. And so actually there's more and more Spitfires coming, on the market.
Are you glad that after, say, flying the Spitfire, that you actually, even though you really didn't want to, in the Falklands dispute, that you actually got some sort of combat flying hours, that you actually sort of were flying into the danger zone, for one of
we did fly into the danger zone because we didn't stay at Ascension Island. We actually went to the Falklands, albeit when the big conflict had just finished, because we needed somewhere to land. So at the time, we're going back 1982. It did seem feather in one's cap, something like that you'd been involved, or albeit on the very edge of it. Yeah, Falklands, 29 Squadron, Phantom, blah, blah, blah. But since that was the first conflict that the RAF had been involved in since the Korean War, and they'd hardly been involved in that. So it was really the first conflict since the Second World War. So it was a big deal. But since then, they've been in this whole train of conflicts and pilots in real danger. So at the time, yes, but in the intervening years, that was nothing. I'm not talking about the Sea Harrier pilots, but my own involvement. It did seem. I'll tell you another anecdote, if I may.
Absolutely.
So we're now ensconced as the air defence element in the Falklands. Life wasn't too bad. When we were on duty, we lived and slept in a porter cabin, so not too bad. And we had a visit from, might have been Margaret Thatcher. Certainly came down, but it might have been another kind of TV. I think it was just TV, news TV came down, and they wanted to see a Phantom scramble because we were on alert with armed aeroplanes in case this happened, in case that happened, blah blah blah. And we had a crew, on 5-minute readiness in order to, in the classical way, run out to the aeroplane, not very far away, climb up, rigging on all this helmet stuff, plonk down, and while you're strapping in, you're giving the wind-up signal with your classic, scramble, 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 okay? So on this day, I was the duty pilot on alert, along with my navigator. And so it was rigged up for the TV news, who was standing outside the porter cabin door with their camera on a tripod, probably in those days, that the alarm would sound, the duty crew would sprint out and climb up the ladders, twirl the fingers and reheats and all the stuff you would want out of that visually. So we're sitting inside the porter cabin, knowing the bell is going to ring, and we had to grab our life jackets on the way from a hook, and this had things dangling from it, tubes and clips and God knows what. Okay. Scramble, 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 which was a bit artificial, but that's World War II. But they did actually say that whilst ringing a bell for the TV. I come bursting out of the porter cabin, trying not to look and slyly grin at the camera, but I didn't. Bursting out of the porter cabin, and these dangling things off my life jacket got caught on the door handle. So I did some kind of cartoon, one step forward and one step back. That was not the look I was trying to give to the TV at all, as I looked a bit of an idiot. Untangled myself, went and did the rest of the job. About a year later, I was sitting in Cyprus and I met an Australian I didn't know any Australians in those days. Oh, what have you been doing? This, and I said, I did a spell in the Falklands after the war. He said, oh yeah, I saw I won't say the exact word, I remember seeing on TV news some complete prat come charging out of the porter cabin and got snarled up with the door handle. And I said, yeah, that was me. Now, how could it get to Australia and be remembered? So this news clip had perhaps gone around the world as
viral.
Viral is the things didn't go viral then. You just watched what you were fed on the TV. But people as far away as Australia saw me get snarled up on the.
That is amazing. You're also quite an accomplished aviation artist and artist in general.
Didn't know you knew that much.
So what got you into the painting in the first place?
I do remember, it's not a very inspiring story, but when I was on a certain unit, there were prints were selling of military airplanes in side-on view. Just that. There was a white background and they were highly detailed. So I tried to copy those and got it. And then I found that I could actually make a painting, and people started buying them, and that progressed as a business. I got better and better, and such that in 1985, when I left the RAF, the revenue from my painting business was the same as my salary.
It's amazing attention to detail that you do have in the in your paintings.
Well, it's because it's a subject I know well. I know what pilots like. I was selling to pilots exclusively, and if a plane is in any way coming towards you, it's called textual perspective, where you put detail on the bit that's close to you and fade out the detail as it goes, as the rest of the plane goes. It doesn't go away from you, but the bit that's close to you has the most detail, as it does in looking around a room, and that appealed to pilots. And in those, 1985 is that 35 years ago? Yeah. I was selling paintings, as many as I could knock out. I don't like to use that phrase to my clients, for $600 each, 35 oil paintings. Wow. Now, I have sold some paintings recently for like $1,000, but not dollars, but not many. 35 years ago, what's the inflation in that time? I couldn't sell a painting for that much nowadays to save my life. I didn't know how lucky I was. So I did enjoy that, and I made prints of the paintings and advertised them, and I liked selling stuff that I had made. I got a huge satisfaction from that, more than the cash that I got after tax. Such that I remember I was displaying a Spitfire at an air show, a big air show, a USAF base in England. I don't know, 100, at least let's say 100,000 spectators. And I displayed the Spitfire, but at this time we also, myself, my wife and my 2 kids who were less than 10, I guess, we carted a caravan around to a lot of air shows and sold prints out of the back of the caravan, the awning. So that was set up at this air show. This particular time I displayed the Spitfire, landed, parked it away somewhere. I went back to the caravan to sell prints mainly, not the actual paintings. And I remember thinking I enjoyed that afternoon doing market type business. I enjoyed that as much as I did flying the Spitfire. Somebody would say, how much are those? And I go, 20 quid or whatever. Or, would you take 10? And I go, no. But you ended up taking 15. That sort of market type business, I loved it. And I loved the fact that it was stuff that I had made. And that particular day, I enjoyed doing that side as much as the air display.
If someone wants to find out about your painting and have a look at them, how can they do that?
Oh, thank you for asking, Mark. TimNolanArt.com.
Cool. Well, it's a great way to end, and thanks for joining us, Tim Nolan. Thanks for joining us over the bonnet.
Oh, thank you, Mark.